Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today on a conversation between Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink. He's an ex-Navy SEAL.
Oh, wow.
And, it's really interesting stuff. I mean, they talk about self-improvement and truth-telling and, living a meaningful life.
Yeah.
And you know what? Our source is one of their YouTube videos. So we're going to break it down, their conversation,
Okay.
and pull out some really useful advice and insights that I think you can use.
Yeah, it's really interesting seeing these two guys, Peterson the psychologist and Willink the military man come together and talk about these big life questions.
Yeah.
You know.
It's cool.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Peterson, he starts off by
Yeah.
saying you should confront your weaknesses head on right.
Mm.
He says to sit down and ask yourself, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong that I could fix? It seems simple, but, if you think about
It's
it.
all about being honest with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like, we tend to avoid thinking about our flaws.
But Peterson's arguing that facing them is the only way to really improve.
Yeah, and he's not talking about just any old thing you could do better.
Right.
He's talking about something that you're messing up,
Uh-huh.
that you could actually change. I mean,
Yeah.
there might be some bad habits that you just aren't ready to give up yet,
Right. Everyone has their guilty pleasures.
Right.
But the point is that acknowledging those flaws,
Mm-hmm.
that's the first step.
Yeah.
Peterson even says that just quitting stupid things
Mm-hmm.
can make a huge difference,
Yeah.
And he talks about micro improvements,
Mm.
which is super interesting.
Yeah, that's the idea that even tiny changes, if you do them consistently,
Right.
can build up to huge progress over time.
Like compound interest, but for self-improvement.
Yeah.
Small changes, they add up to big results.
Mm-hmm.
So, what's your takeaway from it?
Well, what's one small thing you could fix today?
Yeah.
It reminds me of that thing Peterson says about getting rid of clutter. Like, a messy room, it actually makes you anxious, right?
Mm.
Why? Too many things to distract you.
Right.
And I think, what does this mean beyond just physical clutter?
Absolutely. It's about mental clutter, too.
Yeah.
Negative thoughts, bad habits, all those things holding you back.
Yeah.
What if you thought about that one small change as clearing the path for something positive to happen?
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, get ready for some brutal honesty. Peterson is a huge advocate for telling the truth.
Mm-hmm.
He says it takes real courage.
Right.
And it's the path to a more fulfilling life.
And that's hard for a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
We're wired to avoid discomfort.
Yeah.
And sometimes telling the truth leads to conflict or makes us face things about ourselves we'd rather not,
Yeah.
There's a psychological concept called cognitive dissonance that kind of helps explain this.
Okay.
We feel uncomfortable when our actions don't match our beliefs. And that discomfort can make us avoid the truth.
Yeah. Peterson doesn't shy away from that discomfort, though.
No.
He even asks, if you're not speaking the truth, who is it that's talking?
Well,
Think about that for a second, right?
Yeah.
It's like if you say something you don't believe, you're letting something else control you.
he's saying that using manipulative language, it's almost like being possessed.
Wow.
And if you live your whole life that way, you'll end up bitter, realizing you never really lived your own life.
Right.
So what are we giving up when we avoid the truth?
Yeah.
Are we choosing comfort over authenticity or social acceptance over personal growth?
And speaking of growth, both Peterson and Jocko are big readers.
Yeah.
They believe that books give you access to wisdom and experiences that can accelerate your development. Imagine having the best mentors in the world right there in your hands.
Jocko even uses an example from his time in the military. He says reading Colonel David Hackworth's book about face while he was deployed taught him valuable lessons that he could use in really intense situations.
Wow.
And Peterson takes it even further. He says that reading something, even just once, is infinitely better than never having seen it at all. He even claims that just that single exposure to an idea can make you infinitely better in the long run.
Oh.
So, what if we thought about books as mentors, helping us to understand different viewpoints?
Yeah, they both say reading isn't just about learning facts.
Right.
It's about gaining experience without having to go through it yourself.
Yeah.
Peterson gives a great example. He says he read The Neuropsychology of Anxiety, and it gave him 30 years worth of knowledge in just 6 months.
Wow.
Think about how you could use reading to speed up your own personal growth.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And here's something you might not expect. Jocko, the former Navy SEAL, was deeply impacted by Shakespeare.
I know, right? It seems so unlikely.
Yeah.
But Peterson explains that, wrestling with Shakespeare's language, it forced Jocko to really understand the nuances of words. Jocko even says it helped him understand complex military documents.
That leads to a really fascinating topic, etymology, which is like the history of words.
Right.
Peterson describes words as like ancient artifacts, each with, a rich history and meaning.
Yeah.
He says the more you know about words, the more you know about yourself and other people, and that makes you a better communicator.
And this ties right into Peterson's belief in the power of writing.
Yeah.
He calls it formalized thinking.
Oh,
He
wow.
argues that becoming a better writer actually makes you a better thinker
Right.
and a more persuasive communicator.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that?
Well, it makes sense when you think
Yep.
about it, right? To write clearly, you have to organize your thoughts
Yeah.
and really understand what you want to say. And those are essential skills for pretty much any field.
Right.
Think about how important communication is for leadership, for negotiating, for achieving any goal you set for yourself.
Yep.
Peterson even says writing is the most powerful weapon you can possibly provide someone with.
So learn to write.
Yeah.
Learn to think and become unstoppable.
Right.
But here's a paradox. Peterson says true freedom often comes from embracing discipline.
Interesting.
He's not talking about rigid rules.
Okay.
He's talking about creating structure in your life so you can reach your full potential.
He uses the example of a concert pianist.
Yeah.
They need thousands of hours of disciplined practice to achieve mastery and artistic freedom.
Right.
It's about choosing long-term fulfillment over short-term gratification.
I see.
Peterson, he wants us to see discipline not as a limitation,
Right.
but as a way to enable growth and reach higher levels of potential.
Yeah.
He actually says that you grow in proportion to the weight you take on voluntarily. What if we thought about discipline as a tool that helps us build something amazing?
Yeah, it's like Peterson saying, take on a heavy burden, see if you can put yourself together, see what you can do while you're waiting to die.
Whoa, that's powerful.
Yeah, he wants us to really live, not just sleepwalk through life.
Right.
But he also gets really real about the big question. Like he asks, is life inherently meaningful or meaningless? And
Yeah.
he doesn't sugarcoat it.
No.
He says there are serious consequences to both of those views.
Yeah.
A meaningless life, while seemingly free,
Right.
can lead to just chasing pleasure and never feeling fulfilled.
But like imagine that vision of, retiring on a beach.
Uh-huh.
Peterson says it's an illusion,
Yeah.
a kind of drug-induced state that won't last.
Right.
He says you'll be bored in a week, depressed in a month, and aimless with no goals.
Yeah, that's a pretty bleak picture.
Yeah.
But Peterson offers another option, a meaningful life.
Right.
It requires taking responsibility and taking action.
Yeah.
But it also offers like a deeper sense of purpose and satisfaction.
Yeah.
And you might be surprised by what he says is the path to choosing meaning. He says, start by fixing the things you do every single day.
Really?
Most people think those daily routines are trivial, but Peterson says that's exactly wrong.
Interesting.
It's fascinating. He's suggesting that the small things that we do repeatedly actually make up the biggest portion of our lives.
That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, the things we do every day are actually the most important things.
Right.
And they can be an easy place to start making big changes just by making small, consistent improvements.
He even connects this back to his point about fixing small things.
Yeah.
Choose a meaningful life, he argues, and start by fixing the things you repeat daily. Because what you do every day ends up being the most important thing you do.
It all ties together. We've covered self-improvement, telling the truth, the power of reading and writing, and the paradox of discipline leading to freedom.
Yeah.
But Peterson, he goes even deeper.
Yeah.
He explores how we create our sense of self in the world.
He says we all have these different personas that we show to the world.
Right.
Often to get approval or hide our insecurities.
Yeah, he uses the analogy of a puppet being controlled by outside forces.
Like who's pulling your strings?
Right, and it reminds me of that scene in Pinocchio where all the boys turn into donkeys on Pleasure Island.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a powerful metaphor for what happens when we let external forces define us.
Right.
We become puppets, acting out roles that aren't really ours.
And Peterson warns that this leads to a meaningless life. You're playing a character, but it's not your story.
He contrasts this with the idea of the try-self,
Right.
which comes from honesty, being genuine, in facing our limitations.
Yeah.
That's where the real adventure of life lies. What stands out to you about this idea of the true self?
I think it's about being vulnerable and imperfect
Right.
instead of trying to look perfect to everyone else.
Which can be scary, of course.
Yeah.
It takes courage to let go of those masks and just be ourselves.
But Peterson says it's worth the risk. He says true fulfillment comes from aligning your actions with your deepest values and going after what truly matters to you.
He even calls living a meaningful life an all-in game.
Yeah.
He says the real adventure is pursuing truth quickly and through action, and that the world is designed to reward those things.
He even says that looking into the abyss, facing our deepest fears, is how we find the light.
Think about that. Facing our fears is what leads us to something positive.
And I love how he talks about struggle.
Oh, yeah.
He used to think success meant, like, getting rid of chaos and struggle. But then he realized that struggling is a vital part of being human.
Interesting.
He talks about Olympic athletes getting depressed after winning gold medals
Oh,
because they reach their ultimate goal and then feel lost, not knowing what to do next.
He's suggesting that we're wired to strive,
Yeah.
to overcome obstacles, to push beyond our comfort zones. We find meaning and purpose in the struggle.
It's like we need that challenge to feel truly alive. He says the more we lean into that struggle, the more we discover what life really is.
He uses a brilliant analogy. Climbing an endless mountain.
Oh, I like that.
Every time you reach a peak, you see a new, higher peak in the distance.
Right. And you might think,
Yeah.
I'll never reach the top.
Right.
But Peterson says it's not about the destination. It's about the journey itself.
It's about the constant process of growth,
Yeah.
of expanding our abilities and understanding.
And Peterson believes that this journey is for everyone.
Right.
He says find the things that bother you, that make you uncomfortable, and lean into them.
Okay.
He believes those areas of discomfort are actually clues about where you should focus your energy.
Interesting.
He calls them your things, the things that have got you.
He believes those challenges are where real transformation happens.
Right.
It's where you discover your strengths, your resilience, and your unique path.
And this leads to another piece of advice from Peterson. Be honest with yourself about your interests, abilities, and limits.
Yeah.
Don't try to be someone you're not.
He wants us to live in line with our values, passions, and authentic selves.
Right.
He even gets specific about the value of time, especially when you're young.
He says if you're 20 years old and you spend an hour working towards a goal, that hour is worth way more than minimum wage.
Oh.
Why? Because you're getting the benefit of that hour for the rest of your life.
There's this powerful idea of the compounding effect of time invested wisely.
Exact.
He says an hour at age 20 is worth at least $50.
Right?
There are 168 hours in a week.
Uh-huh.
So if you're not being productive, you're wasting about $8,400 a week,
Wow.
which is almost $436,800 a year.
Wow. That puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
But he reminds us not to compare ourselves to others. That's
Wow.
a recipe for unhappiness.
Yeah.
There will always be someone who seems to be doing better.
The key is to compare yourself to who you were yesterday.
Right.
Focus on making small improvements each day, rather than chasing after an impossible idea of perfection.
This takes us back to those micro improvements.
Yeah.
Celebrate the small wins, the little steps forward, instead of getting discouraged by how far you still have to go.
Peterson says even when you feel lost or uncertain, there's always something you can do to move forward.
Yeah.
He talks about making bad plans as a starting point.
Yeah. It's better to have an imperfect plan and actually do something
Right.
than to get stuck trying to make the perfect plan.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
He emphasizes that we learn by trying things out, making mistakes, adjusting, and moving on. He's basically saying, don't be afraid to mess up. It's all part of the process.
And he encourages us to be curious, ask questions, and explore the things that fascinate us.
He uses a beautiful phrase, a prayer of humility.
Oh, wow.
It's about admitting that we don't have all the answers.
Yeah.
And being open to new insights and perspectives.
And he believes the answers we're looking for often come from unexpected places.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a book, a conversation, or even a quiet moment of reflection.
Peterson says these aha moments can be incredibly powerful.
Right.
They can change how we see the world and help us understand things in a whole new way.
Yeah.
He even talks about the neuroscience behind this,
Oh.
how our brains are constantly updating our frame of reference based on new experiences and insights.
Oh.
He points out that the way we see the world now is often flawed.
So it's about being willing to challenge what we think we know
Right.
and open ourselves to new perspectives.
He encourages us to embrace lateral thinking, which is like a fancy way of saying think outside the box.
Yeah.
Peterson believes this kind of creative thinking, it's essential for solving tough problems and coming up with new solutions. He even argues that figuring out where you're wrong is incredibly useful and can be beneficial in countless ways.
He's suggesting that there's almost always a better way to think about things, a more nuanced perspective waiting to be discovered.
Yeah, and he says there are endless ways to look at the world, but only a limited number that are productive and meaningful and sustainable.
Right.
It's about constantly learning and growing, refining how we understand ourselves and the world around us.
What do you make of that?
What's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
And he reminds us to be patient with ourselves.
Right.
You can't just force your brain to come up with brilliant solutions, right?
Yeah.
It takes time and effort and a bit of mystery for those aha moments to happen.
He even suggests those flashes of insight might come from a source that wants to make things better, especially if your intention is to improve the world around you.
Interesting.
But he jokes that if your intention is to make things worse, those ideas might come from, well, a less desirable place.
Let's hope we're all tapping into those positive sources of inspiration.
Yeah, I agree.
But Peterson also brings up the importance of taking responsibility for our actions. He says if you really want to solve big problems in the world, you have to acknowledge how serious they are without letting that paralyze you.
Right.
He compares it to facing down terrifying creatures from mythology,
Right.
like the Hydra or Medusa.
Those are some intense images, right?
Yeah.
But his point is that we can't shy away from difficult things.
Right.
We have to confront them head on.
He reminds us that the more responsibility we take on, the more meaning we find in life. It gives us a reason to get up in the morning, even when things are tough.
It all circles back to those micro improvements, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Fixing those small things we do every day, being honest with ourselves and others, embracing discipline as a path to freedom, and choosing a life of meaning.
Those are the threads that create a fulfilling life, at least according to Peterson and Willink.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, think about that mountain Peterson describes.
Yeah.
What is the mountain you're climbing, that goal that keeps moving forward as you move towards it?
Right. What's on your horizon?
What steps can you take today, even small ones, to reach a higher peak?
Remember, even those tiny, consistent actions can lead to amazing results over time.
And if this conversation has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to explore more of Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink's work.
Yeah, they're both incredible thinkers who challenge us to look closely at our lives and strive for something more.
Until next time, keep diving deep.